You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. What if I told you that the moment you stopped chasing, stopped explaining, and stopped trying to prove your worth, something shifted in her mind? What if your silence didn't make you forgettable, but unforgettable? Most men believe that when a woman walks away, she moves on effortlessly. No second thoughts, no late-night reflections, no regret. But that belief is comforting fiction. In reality, regret doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives quietly. It shows up in subtle behaviors, unexpected reactions, and moments she never talks about. And here's the uncomfortable truth most men never hear. Regret often begins after you reclaim your self-respect, not while you're begging for attention. This video isn't about revenge. It's not about manipulation. It's about understanding the psychological and emotional signals that reveal when a woman realizes she lost something rare, something steady, something grounded, something she assumed would always be there. If you've ever wondered whether your absence meant nothing or everything, this video will change how you see the situation entirely. Watch until the very end, because the final sign is the one almost everyone misses, and it's the one that reveals the deepest regret of all. Number 1, she keeps checking your social media without engaging. When someone keeps checking your social media without engaging, it's easy to turn that into a story about power, validation, or quiet victory. But if you're serious about growth, this sign isn't meant to inflate your ego. It's meant to sharpen your discipline. What's really happening here lives in the space between curiosity and restraint, desire and pride, impulse and hesitation. And how you respond internally to this sign matters far more than the sign itself. Silent watching is a form of unresolved tension. It's attention without courage, interest without action, presence without vulnerability. When someone looks but doesn't touch, observes but doesn't speak, it often means the connection hasn't dissolved internally, even if it has externally. There's still an emotional thread there, but it's tangled with hesitation, fear, or pride. And here's the part most men miss. This behavior isn't an invitation for you to lean forward. It's a test of whether you've learned how to stand still. The Stoics would never tell you to read signs as permission to reattach yourself emotionally. They would tell you to read signs as information and nothing more. Wrote, the tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do. That tranquility is exactly what's being trained here. When you know someone is watching you silently, the old impulse is to perform, to curate, to post with intention. But mastery shows up when you don't change a thing. When your behavior remains aligned with your values, not adjusted to provoke a reaction. You don't need engagement to confirm impact. Attention without action already tells its own story. And yet this is where many men stumble. They start imagining what each view means. They replay timelines. They look for patterns. They allow curiosity to quietly pull them backward. Stoicism teaches you to notice the impulse without obeying it. Just because someone is watching doesn't mean you owe them access, emotionally or mentally. Epictetus said, if you want to be invincible, make yourself indifferent to things you cannot control. You cannot control who watches you, why they watch, or what they feel while watching. You can control whether you let that knowledge disrupt your focus. Silent observation often reflects internal conflict on their side, but your task is not to resolve it. Your task is to remain unmoved. This sign often triggers delayed validation. It feels subtle, quiet, almost flattering, but delayed validation is still validation seeking if you let it feed you. The Stoic path asks you to starve that habit, not with bitterness, not with suppression, with awareness. You remind yourself that respect comes from consistency, not reaction, from restraint, not response, from self-command, not interpretation. There's a deeper layer here. When someone watches without engaging, It means they're not ready to face the reality of who you've become, or the consequences of losing access to you. That discomfort belongs to them. The moment you start adjusting your behavior to send signals back, you take on emotional labor that was never yours. Seneca warned, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Overanalyzing silent attention is exactly that, imagined meaning replacing lived discipline. Your power in this situation is quiet. It's boring to the ego but stabilizing to the soul. You don't check who's viewing your stories. You don't post for reaction. You don't interpret silence as a message. You treat it as background noise, not because you're numb but because you're grounded. Here's a practical exercise to train this. The moment you feel the urge to check engagement metrics or replay what a view might mean, pause and breathe slowly 5 times. On each exhale, remind yourself, what they do is outside my control. What I do is not. Then redirect your attention to a task that builds you, physically, mentally, or spiritually. This trains your nervous system to detach from external cues and return to internal direction. Another exercise is intentional non-performance. For a set period of time, post or don't post exactly as you would if no one specific were watching. No timing strategies, no signaling, no indirect communication. This is not avoidance, it's integrity training. You're teaching yourself that your life is not a broadcast designed to trigger responses, but a process designed to shape character. The calm truth is this: silent watching fades when there's nothing to feed on. And what feeds it is not your success, it's your reactivity. When you remain unchanged, when your energy stays clean and forward-facing, unresolved attention eventually collapses under its own weight. This sign is not about her regret as much as it is about your restraint. It's an opportunity to practice emotional independence in a world obsessed with feedback. To prove to yourself, not anyone else, that you don't need engagement to feel validated, and you don't need closure to keep moving. So take this moment seriously, not as a signal to act, but as a chance to refine your composure. Let your silence be complete. Let your focus stay forward. And remember the Stoic principle that never fails. The man who governs himself is never at the mercy of someone else's attention. Number 2, she resurfaces with casual messages or inside jokes. When she resurfaces with casual messages or inside jokes, it rarely means what it pretends to mean. On the surface, it looks light, effortless, almost accidental, a harmless line, a shared reference, a memory wrapped in humor. But underneath that ease is usually hesitation mixed with longing, curiosity mixed with regret. This is not about rekindling something openly. It's about testing emotional temperature without risking pride. And if you understand this moment clearly, you stop misreading it as coincidence and start seeing it as communication without courage. What's important is not the message itself, but the choice to send it. Inside jokes are emotional shortcuts. They bypass logic and go straight to shared identity. When someone uses them after distance, they're not just reminiscing. They're reopening a door while pretending they didn't touch the handle. That's why the tone is casual. Casual creates plausible deniability. If you respond warmly, the door opens wider. If you don't, she can retreat without losing face. This is not manipulation in a dramatic sense. It's uncertainty trying to protect itself. From a Stoic lens, this is where your discipline matters more than your feelings. Wrote, the tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do. That doesn't mean you ignore reality. It means you don't let subtle signals pull you off your center. When someone resurfaces this way, the test is not about whether she regrets losing you. The test is whether you still give emotional leverage to the past. These messages often arrive when contrast has formed. Time has passed, space has done its work, and absence has quietly highlighted what presence once provided. That's when the mind looks backward, not to relive but to reassess. Regret doesn't always come with drama. Often it shows up as curiosity dressed as humor. Remember this, without asking the more honest question: do you still feel something? Seneca warned, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." This applies here in a subtle way. The danger isn't her message. The danger is the story you might attach to it. Hope can rush in. Ego can inflate. Old emotional patterns can wake up. That's why Stoicism teaches restraint before reaction, not suppression. Restraint. You don't need to shut down or open up. You need to stay grounded. If she truly had no emotional residue, there would be no reason to reach out at all. Silence is easier than casual re-entry. Inside jokes only work when the emotional memory behind them still carries weight. So yes, resurfacing like this often signals regret, or at least reevaluation. But understanding that is less important than understanding your response, because your response reveals whether you've grown or simply waited. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." In modern terms, this means not rushing to perform the version of yourself you think is wanted. Calm responses, measured energy, no emotional overinvestment, not because you're trying to appear strong, but because you are steady. You don't punish. You don't chase. You respond from choice, not reflex. There's a deeper truth here. Casual messages are often attempts to reclaim emotional access without accountability. They test whether familiarity still grants entry. If it does, regret feels less costly. If it doesn't, growth becomes undeniable. And growth is intimidating to someone who once felt secure in your availability. When you no longer rush to reoccupy old roles, something shifts. Respect replaces comfort. Curiosity replaces certainty. This is where Stoic detachment becomes your advantage. Detachment doesn't mean indifference. It means you are no longer governed by emotional impulses triggered by the past. You observe the message, you notice what it stirs, and then you choose your behavior consciously. Reminded himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. The message is the event. Your reaction is the choice. A practical exercise here is the pause. When a message like this arrives, do nothing at first, not out of strategy but out of respect for your own emotional clarity. Breathe. Let the initial surge settle. Ask yourself one simple question: am I responding from alignment or nostalgia? If it's nostalgia, wait longer. Nostalgia clouds judgment. Alignment sharpens it. Another exercise is outcome neutrality. Before responding, if you choose to, release the need for a specific result. You're not trying to restart something. You're not trying to close anything either. You're simply responding as someone who is whole. That neutrality is felt. It communicates that your life is full, your center intact. And paradoxically, that's often when regret becomes clearest on the other side. Stoicism also teaches you to watch patterns, not moments. One message can mean many things. Repeated resurfacing, always casual, always indirect, often points to unresolved emotion mixed with fear of vulnerability. But your task is not to decode her inner world. Your task is to protect your own progress. Seneca wrote, "He who returns to the place where he once stumbled is not wise unless he walks more carefully." Awareness without discipline leads you back into old loops. You don't need to confront. You don't need to accuse. You don't need to read between every line. You need to embody calm self-respect. If you engage, engage lightly and honestly. If you don't explain yourself. Silence, when chosen consciously, is not avoidance, it's self-governance. When she resurfaces with casual messages or inside jokes, it's often because something inside her is unsettled. But the real signal isn't her regret. It's whether you've reached a place where your peace no longer depends on her clarity. That's the Stoic win. Not indifference, not bitterness, but quiet composure. Your growth shows not in what you say back, but in how little you need the moment to mean something. Practice that daily. Watch your impulses. Strengthen your pause. Choose responses that reflect who you've become, not who you used to be. And remember the Stoic rule that never fails. Your power is not in reopening doors, but in knowing you can walk forward without looking back. Number 3, she asks mutual friends about your life. When she asks mutual friends about your life, it's rarely about idle curiosity. It's a quiet signal, indirect by design and loaded with meaning. You're no longer in her immediate orbit, yet your presence still occupies mental space. Instead of reaching out directly, she chooses the safer distance of second-hand information. That distance matters. It tells you there's hesitation, reflection, and a pull she hasn't fully resolved. And the moment you understand this, the real work shifts away from interpreting her behavior and back toward mastering your own response. People don't seek updates on someone they've emotionally closed the door on. The Stoics understood that attention follows value. Wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." If she's thinking about you enough to ask others, your imprint hasn't faded. But here's the deeper layer most men miss. This behavior is less about you as a person and more about how you made her feel about herself. Loss sharpens awareness. Distance clarifies what presence once provided. And regret often speaks in whispers before it ever dares to speak aloud. You might feel a surge of validation when you hear that she's asking about you. That reaction is human, but this is exactly where Stoic discipline matters. Epictetus warned, if you want to be invincible, make sure that no external thing can disturb your peace. Her curiosity is not a signal for you to react, chase, or adjust your path. It's a mirror reflecting that your absence has weight. Your task is not to lean toward it, but to remain steady where you are. When someone uses mutual friends as a channel, it often means direct contact feels emotionally risky. There's uncertainty, pride, fear of rejection, or the realization that reaching out might expose vulnerability she's not ready to face. So she gathers fragments instead. How are you doing? Are you happy? Have you changed? These questions are rarely neutral. They're comparisons, benchmarks, silent calculations about whether losing you was a mistake. What matters most is not the question she asks, but how you hold yourself in response to knowing they're being asked. Stoic strength is not found in decoding every signal. It's found in refusing to let signals dictate your inner state. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." If you allow yourself to fantasize, hope, or relive old dynamics, you hand your calm over to something uncertain. Regret on her side does not automatically mean reconciliation, nor should it become your focus. Here's the paradox. The more composed and forward-moving you remain, the more powerful her curiosity becomes, without you doing anything at all. This isn't strategy, it's alignment. When you're genuinely engaged in your own growth, your energy changes. You stop orbiting the past. You stop checking emotional weather reports. You become grounded in what is, not what might return. That groundedness is felt, even at a distance, even through other people's mouths. Stoicism teaches you to measure progress internally, not relationally. Reminded himself, do not waste what remains of your life in speculating about others. If she's asking about you, let that be her process, not your project. Your responsibility is to continue becoming someone who doesn't need to be monitored to feel complete. Someone whose life doesn't pause waiting for recognition. Someone whose absence speaks because his presence was real. A practical exercise here is attention redirection. Each time your mind drifts toward what she might be thinking or asking, gently pull it back to what you are building now. Ask yourself one grounded question. What action today strengthens my character? Then do that. This trains your mind to value agency over speculation. Over time, curiosity from others loses its emotional pull because your sense of direction is no longer up for negotiation. Another practice is emotional neutrality. When you hear updates, good, bad, or ambiguous, practice receiving them without reaction. No internal spike, no mental storytelling, just information passing through. This is harder than it sounds, but it's transformative. You're teaching yourself that your worth doesn't rise or fall based on who's asking about you. Epictetus said, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." Change the judgment and the disturbance dissolves. It's also worth understanding that regret often arrives late, not because the connection lacked value, but because people don't feel loss immediately. They feel relief, distraction, novelty. Only later does the absence become specific. Only later does silence begin to echo. Asking mutual friends is often the first step of that realization. But realization alone doesn't guarantee action, and that's why you must not anchor yourself to it. Your calm, your progress, your restraint, these are the things that give meaning to her curiosity, not clever responses, not indirect messages, not emotional availability on standby. Stoic men don't posture, they proceed. They let others observe from a distance if that's where they are. They don't close doors aggressively, but they don't reopen them impulsively either. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." Freedom here means emotional independence. You are free when someone can wonder about you without you wondering back. Free when questions circulate without pulling you off center. Free when regret exists somewhere outside you, no longer shaping your choices. If she's asking about your life, let your life be the answer, quietly, steadily, without announcement. Continue refining your habits, your discipline, your sense of purpose. Let your days be full enough that curiosity, even regret, arrives as background noise rather than a call to action. That is how you honor your past without living in it. And that is how you turn her questions into something far more important, proof that your value was real and that you are no longer waiting to be rediscovered. Number 4, she becomes unusually emotional or defensive around you. When she becomes unusually emotional or defensive around you, it's rarely about the present moment. It's about an internal collision she hasn't resolved. Calm on the surface may vanish. Reactions feel sharper. Words carry more weight than necessary. This shift isn't random, and it isn't weakness, it's friction. You represent something unfinished in her mind, and unfinished things disturb emotional balance. When someone has fully moved on, their nervous system is quiet. When regret lingers, the body speaks before logic can intervene. You need to understand this without feeding your ego or reopening old wounds. Emotional spikes are not invitations. Defensiveness is not clarity. These are signals of inner tension, not direction. Stoicism teaches you to read signals without being ruled by them. Wrote, "Do not let your mind be led by the passions of the body." That applies here more than you may realize. Her emotional shifts are information, not commands. The moment you mistake them for opportunity, you lose the position you've earned. Defensiveness often appears when someone feels internally exposed. When you're around, she may feel judged without being judged, evaluated without words, reminded without accusation. That pressure doesn't come from you. It comes from comparison between who she believed you were, who you became, and the version of herself that let go. This internal comparison triggers self-protection. Emotional armor goes up. Tone changes. Reactions become disproportionate. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because your presence disrupts the story she told herself to stay comfortable. Here, where your discipline matters. If you react emotionally to her emotionality, you reinforce chaos. If you try to soothe defensiveness with reassurance, you reward instability. The Stoics would call this surrendering the inner citadel. Epictetus warned, if you want to be invincible, make sure no one has the power to disturb your inner peace. You don't gain strength by calming her emotions. You gain it by governing your own. Calm is not indifference, it's self-respect in motion. Unusual emotion often masks unresolved loss. Not always longing, not always desire, but the loss of certainty. When someone loses access to you, not just physically but psychologically, the mind searches for closure. Emotional responses surface because the story feels unfinished. Defensiveness emerges because admitting regret would require vulnerability, and vulnerability would require accountability. It's easier to be reactive than reflective, easier to push than to admit. You don't need to decode every fluctuation. You just need to stay centered. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Her reactions are often tied to imagined futures, imagined judgments, imagined missed paths. None of that is your responsibility. The Stoic path asks you to separate what is yours to manage from what is not. Her emotions belong to her. Your composure belongs to you. When you hold that line, you don't become cold, you become grounded. And grounded men don't provoke drama, they expose it without effort. This is where many men sabotage themselves. They see emotion and assume leverage. They see defensiveness and assume interest. But high-value understanding means restraint. It means recognizing that emotional intensity does not equal readiness, and regret does not equal reconciliation. You don't need to correct her feelings. You don't need to explain your growth. You don't need to justify your silence or presence. You let the emotional wave rise and fall without stepping into it. The Stoics trained themselves to observe without attachment, reminded himself, choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Apply that here. Choose not to be pulled into emotional volatility and it loses its power. When you remain composed, something subtle happens. Her emotional spikes either intensify briefly, because they're no longer getting feedback, or they dissolve. Either outcome works in your favor because you are no longer participating in unresolved tension. Your role is not to fix the emotional dynamic. Your role is to maintain internal order. One practical exercise is emotional mirroring without absorption. When emotion appears, acknowledge it internally without reacting externally. Breathe, relax your shoulders, slow your speech. Let silence do the heavy lifting. This trains your nervous system to remain regulated in the presence of emotional fluctuation. Regulation is strength. It, felt immediately, even if it's never named. Another exercise is outcome neutrality. Before any interaction, remind yourself that clarity is not required today. Resolution is not owed. You are not there to extract meaning. You are there to remain aligned. Repeat this silently. I am responsible for my conduct, not for her emotions. This single line can keep you from sliding back into old patterns. Defensiveness often seeks engagement. It wants explanation, reaction, or validation. When you don't provide those things impulsively, you create psychological contrast. You are no longer the familiar version she expects. You are steadier, quieter, less accessible emotionally, not withdrawn but contained. This containment is what shifts power dynamics naturally, without strategy or effort. Stoicism doesn't teach you to suppress compassion. It teaches you to apply it wisely. You can understand her emotional state without entering it. You can acknowledge tension without feeding it. You can remain respectful without reopening emotional doors that no longer serve you. That balance is rare, and rarity commands respect. Remember this, regret often expresses itself sideways, not as confession but as irritation, not as longing but as defensiveness, not as clarity but as emotional noise. Your task is not to interpret the noise. Your task is to remain still within it. As Epictetus said, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Decide who you are now, calm, grounded, self-governed, and act from that place consistently. If you adopt this posture, something shifts permanently. You stop seeking signs. You stop analyzing reactions. You stop waiting for emotional cues to guide your behavior. You become the constant, not the variable. And whether her emotions settle or intensify, you remain unaffected. That is the quiet power of emotional discipline. Take action today by training stillness. Sit in silence for a few minutes daily and observe your emotional impulses without moving. Let thoughts arise and pass. This strengthens the muscle you'll need most, non-reactivity. When you can master that, no emotional display can pull you off center. She may feel regret. She may feel confusion. She may feel unresolved tension. But none of that defines you. What defines you is your ability to remain composed, intentional, and self-directed in the presence of emotional volatility. And that, more than any reaction or response, is what ultimately sets you apart. Number 5, she tries to subtly show she's doing better without you. When someone tries to subtly show she's doing better without you, it's rarely about peace. It's about friction inside her that hasn't settled yet. True contentment doesn't announce itself. It doesn't posture. It doesn't need witnesses. The impulse to signal improvement is often the mind reaching outward, hopping for confirmation that a choice didn't cost more than expected. And if you're paying attention, not emotionally, but calmly, you can feel the difference between genuine growth and quiet regret wearing a confident mask. This behavior isn't loud. It's measured, controlled, almost casual. That's what makes it easy to misread. It looks like strength on the surface, but beneath it is comparison. Comparison only exists when something unresolved remains. The Stoics understood this instinct well. Seneca wrote, "The greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today." When someone needs to prove they're thriving, they're often still tethered to yesterday, still checking the scoreboard, still hoping their progress is seen, felt, registered. What matters here is not why she does it, but what it invites you to do. This is where most men lose ground. They react, they interpret, they lean forward emotionally, trying to decode meaning, hopping for validation or closure. But the Stoic path asks something else of you: composure, not detachment, composure. Reminded himself, choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. The signal loses power the moment you stop assigning meaning to it. When someone subtly broadcasts how well they're doing, it often carries an unspoken question. Do you see me? Does this affect you? Not consciously, not maliciously, but instinctively. Humans want their decisions to feel justified. And when a connection mattered, the need for justification can linger long after the separation. That's not your burden to carry. Your work is not to interpret signals, but to remain anchored. This is where your response, internal not external, becomes everything. If you allow those signals to stir you, you give them gravity. If you stay centered, they dissipate on their own. Epictetus was clear. If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. Calm awareness is not indifference. It's self-respect in motion. You don't deny what you notice. You simply refuse to be pulled by it. There is a quiet power in not competing with appearances. Growth that needs to be seen is still negotiating with insecurity. Growth that is real doesn't scan for reactions. When you understand this, you stop comparing trajectories. You stop measuring progress through someone else's presentation. You return to your own lane, and that return is felt, even if nothing is said. What often goes unspoken is that these signals are less about you personally and more about identity repair. When a bond ends, the self-image cracks. The mind rushes to patch it. I'm fine. I'm better. I'm thriving. Stoicism doesn't mock this impulse. It observes it. Seneca noted, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." The performance of improvement is often a response to imagined judgment, not real evaluation. Your strength is revealed in how little you need to respond, not outwardly but inwardly. You don't countersignal. You don't upgrade your own image to match or exceed. You don't prove anything. You stay steady. You let actions unfold without commentary. That steadiness communicates more than any display ever could. Here, where this becomes practical, the first exercise is mental withdrawal from comparison. Each time your mind drifts toward evaluating how someone else is doing, gently pull it back. Ask yourself, is this within my control? Ask that question relentlessly. The answer here is always no. Their presentation, their progress, their narrative, none of it belongs to you. Release it deliberately. The second exercise is identity reinforcement. Daily, remind yourself of who you are becoming, independent of external reference points. Not what you've lost, not what someone else is showing. Who you are choosing to build. Write it, sit with it, feel it. Stoicism is not passive acceptance, it is active alignment. When your identity is solid, signals lose their pull. The third practice is emotional economy. Stop spending emotional energy on decoding. Curiosity is fine. Obsession is not. Each time you feel the urge to analyze, pause, and redirect that energy into something constructive. Reflection, discipline, stillness. Epictetus said, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." This is how you conserve strength. What's important to understand is that regret doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it dresses itself as success. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it posts, signals, hints, and performs. But performance is effort, and effort reveals tension. True peace is quiet. It doesn't check who's watching. Your role is not to confirm or deny anyone else's narrative. Your role is to remain unmoved by the need to be included in it. That composure creates a subtle reversal. The less you react, the less control the signal has. And control, not over others but over yourself, is the only kind that matters. Stoicism teaches that dignity is self-contained. Wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." Living, in this sense, means choosing inner stability over emotional reaction. It means letting others walk their path without commentary from you. It means trusting that what is real does not need to be advertised. So when you notice the quiet signals, the subtle projections of "I'm doing better," don't lean in. Lean inward, breathe, stay grounded. Let the moment pass without interpretation. Practice stillness, practice restraint, practice focus. Over time, you'll notice something shift, not in them but in you. The signals fade, the noise softens, and what remains is clarity. That clarity is your advantage, not because it gives you leverage, but because it frees you. And freedom, emotional, mental, internal, is the ultimate sign that you've already won without needing to prove anything at all. Number 6, she brings up old memories, or what could been moments. When someone starts circling back to old memories or what could been moments, it's rarely about nostalgia alone. It's about unfinished emotion. Memory, in this context, becomes a doorway, one she reopens not to relive the past, but to test whether it still has power. And the way you respond to that doorway matters more than the memory itself. Because this behavior isn't really about history. It's about regret quietly looking for a second chance to be felt. When the past is brought up repeatedly, it's often an indirect language of longing. Not longing for events, but for how she felt when she was anchored to something that no longer exists. The mind revisits moments when the present feels thinner, less certain. And when she frames it as "remember when" or "we could been," what she's really doing is measuring the gap between then and now. You don't need to analyze the words too closely. You need to understand the impulse beneath them. The past becomes attractive only when the present feels incomplete. The Stoics warned against living backward. Wrote, "Do not dwell on the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment." That advice isn't just philosophical, it's practical. When someone is stuck revisiting old timelines, it's a sign they're not fully at peace with the one they're in. Regret doesn't always announce itself with pain. Sometimes it arrives softly, disguised as reflection, curiosity, or hypothetical conversations that lead nowhere but linger everywhere. What's important for you is not to confuse her revisiting the past with a call to recreate it. Often, it's not about returning, it's about relief, about easing the discomfort of loss by touching something familiar. This is where many men slip. They rush to explain, rehash, clarify, or emotionally re-enter. But the Stoic path asks something else of you: restraint. Not coldness, not distance, but grounded presence without attachment to rewriting history. Seneca observed, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." When she reopens old memories, she's standing at the edge of an ending she hasn't fully accepted. You don't need to pull her forward or push her away. You need to stay centered, calm, unreactive, because regret feeds on emotional engagement. It grows stronger when it's rewarded with intensity, reassurance, or emotional availability that blurs boundaries. If you've done the internal work, you'll notice something subtle within yourself when the past is mentioned. A pull, an echo, a momentary temptation to step back into a familiar version of yourself. That's the real test. Not her words, but your response to them. Stoicism teaches mastery over the inner reaction first. Epictetus said, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." A memory is just a memory. It only gains power if you assign it meaning beyond the present. When someone speaks in what ifs, they're often trying to soften the reality of what is. They're testing whether the door is still emotionally unlocked. You don't need to slam it shut. You simply need to stop guarding it. Let it exist without leaning toward it. Let the memory pass through without turning it into a conversation that reopens wounds or rekindles confusion. This is where self-respect becomes visible. You don't correct her version of the past. You don't romanticize it either. You don't deny it. You acknowledge it without dwelling. That neutrality is powerful. It signals that your life is not paused at an old chapter, that you're not anchored to regret, yours or hers. Reminded himself, the mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. Her regret is not your responsibility to resolve. It's simply information. What makes this behavior meaningful is not that she remembers, but that she returns. Memory alone is harmless. Repetition is intentional. Each mention is a subtle emotional probe, checking whether the connection still has charge. And here's the quiet truth. If you respond from strength, that charge often fades. If you respond from longing, it intensifies. Regret seeks resonance. Calm absorbs it without amplifying it. A practical exercise here is emotional neutrality training. When old memories surface, notice your body first. Tightness, warmth, urgency. Then slow your breath. Long exhale, short pause. Ask yourself internally, is this moment asking for presence or for reopening? Choose presence. Presence does not mean participation. It means staying rooted in who you are now, not who you were then. Another exercise is mental reframing. Instead of hearing nostalgia as invitation, hear it as closure in progress. This shifts your internal posture. You're no longer tempted to re-enter the past emotionally. You're simply witnessing someone process their own unfinished feelings. That witnessing, when done calmly, is a form of quiet leadership. Stoicism doesn't ask you to be indifferent to emotion. It asks you to be sovereign over your response to it. Seneca wrote, "A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." Re-engaging emotionally with the past before it's truly aligned with your present costs you energy. And energy is not something you should spend on unresolved timelines. You grow by staying where your feet are. You mature by not needing the past to validate your present. When she brings up old memories, your task is not to correct the story or revive the feeling. It's to remain steady, to let the memory exist without becoming a bridge backward, to allow her regret to surface without making it your emotional labor. The deeper lesson here is about self-command. When you no longer chase closure, it often arrives on its own. When you no longer seek validation from someone's regret, your confidence becomes unmistakable. You stop being pulled into hypothetical worlds. You live in the real one, grounded, forward-facing, intact. Practice this daily. When thoughts of the past arise in your own mind, don't entertain them beyond acknowledgement. Let them pass like weather. Train your nervous system to stay in the present. Over time, you'll notice a shift. You become less reactive, more composed, more selective with your emotional energy. And that composure does something interesting. It transforms regret into respect, not because you demand it, but because you no longer need anything from the past to feel complete. Number 7. She struggles to fully move on despite dating others. There's a quiet truth that often goes unspoken when someone says they've moved on. Movement doesn't always mean resolution. Sometimes it's just motion without direction. When she struggles to fully move on despite dating others, what you're really seeing is not confusion, but unfinished emotional business. And understanding this isn't about feeding your ego or reopening old doors. It's about clarity, about learning to read emotional residue without becoming trapped by it. You sense it in the way time passes but nothing settles. On the surface, life looks busy, filled, forward-moving. Underneath, something remains unresolved. Stoicism teaches that the mind resists letting go of what once felt meaningful. Wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When someone hasn't released a past bond, their present becomes tinted by it, even if they don't consciously admit it. They may be moving, but part of them is still standing where things ended. This struggle to move on is rarely about you as a person and more about what the connection represented. Not the moments, not the memories, but the feeling of alignment, certainty, or emotional grounding that existed at one point. When that imprint remains, new connections don't fully land. They're experienced but not absorbed. There's comparison, even when there's restlessness, even when things seem fine. And the mind keeps circling back, not because it wants to return, but because it hasn't learned how to let go. Here, where your role matters not in action but in restraint. The Stoics were clear about this. Epictetus said, "If you want to be free, do not wish for things to happen as you wish, but wish for things to happen as they do." Her internal struggle is not yours to solve, manage, or respond to. The moment you try to interpret it as a signal to act, you step out of strength and into reaction. Understanding this sign is about staying centered, not getting pulled back into emotional gravity. When someone dates others but hasn't truly moved on, it often reveals an inner split. Part of them wants novelty, distraction, forward momentum. Another part resists closure. That resistance can't be bypassed by replacing faces or changing environments. Stoicism would call this an attachment to impressions, holding onto how something once felt rather than seeing what is now. And attachments like that don't dissolve through effort. They dissolve through acceptance. For you, the real discipline is not reading into what she does, but reading into how you respond internally. Do you feel a pull to interpret, to analyze, to wait for a sign? Or do you remain anchored in your own direction, reminded himself daily, you don't have to turn this into something? That line applies here more than ever. Her inability to fully move on does not require your involvement. It requires your composure. There's also a deeper lesson hidden in this sign. When someone can't emotionally release a past connection, it often means the bond challenged them in a way they didn't resolve internally. It forced growth, reflection, or self-confrontation they may not have completed. New connections then feel lighter but also thinner, less demanding, less real. That doesn't mean they want to go backward. It means they haven't finished digesting what the past revealed about themselves. This is where Stoic detachment becomes power. Detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity without need. Seneca wrote, "The one who clings to anything loses everything." If you cling to the idea that her struggle has something to do with what you should do next, you lose your balance. But if you see it clearly and let it pass, you gain authority over your own emotional state. A practical exercise here is emotional boundary awareness. When thoughts arise about what her behavior might mean, pause and ask yourself one simple question: is this within my control? If the answer is no, and it always is, release it. Not aggressively, gently. Repetition builds strength. Over time, your mind learns to stop chasing meaning where there is none for you to act on. Another discipline is outcome neutrality. Instead of imagining possible futures or unresolved endings, ground yourself in the present. Focus on your breath, your posture, your next constructive action. Stoicism teaches that peace comes from attention directed inward, not outward. When you master this, external signals lose their emotional pull. There's also growth in recognizing that not everyone processes loss at the same pace. Some move forward cleanly. Others carry echoes longer than they expect. That doesn't make them weak. It makes them human. But your strength comes from not becoming part of that echo. You respect the past without living in it. You acknowledge the sign without responding to it. Epictetus advised, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Decide who you are in moments like this. Are you the man who waits for emotional ripples to return, or the man who continues forward undistracted, composed, and grounded? That decision shapes everything. If you want to internalize this lesson, practice mental release. At the end of each day, consciously let go of any lingering thoughts about unresolved connections. Visualize setting them down, not with resentment but with calm finality. You're not erasing the past. You're placing it where it belongs, behind you. The truth is, when she struggles to fully move on despite dating others, it says more about her internal process than about the bond itself. And your quiet strength lies in understanding that without being pulled back into it. You don't need closure from someone else when you can create it within yourself. That is stoic freedom. That is emotional maturity. And that is how you continue forward, not hardened, not hopeful, but centered and complete. Number 8, her respect and curiosity toward you suddenly return. When her respect and curiosity toward you suddenly return, it isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with apologies or dramatic confessions. It arrives quietly, almost cautiously, and that's exactly why it matters. Respect and curiosity are not emotions you can force or negotiate back into existence. They only reappear when something inside you has shifted for real, not on the surface, at the core. And the moment you understand that, you stop looking at her behavior as something to decode and start looking at yourself as the cause. Curiosity is born when certainty disappears. Respect is born when neediness dies. When she no longer feels that she fully understands or controls how you move, think, or feel, curiosity wakes up. When she senses that your self-worth is no longer dependent on her reactions, respect follows close behind. This isn't about playing games or withholding. It's about alignment. When you stand firmly within yourself, you become a question again, not a plea. The Stoics understood this better than most modern thinkers. Wrote, "Never depend on the admiration of others, there is no strength in it." That line cuts straight to the heart of this shift. The moment you stop orienting your actions around approval, you reclaim something rare, inner authority. And inner authority is what respect responds to. Not charm, not effort, not explanations, authority over yourself. When her respect returns, it's because she feels a difference in your energy. You're no longer trying to convince. You're no longer reacting emotionally. You're no longer chasing clarity or closure. You're present but not attached. Calm but not cold. Interested in life, not invested in outcomes. That balance is disarming because it can't be manipulated. Curiosity grows naturally in the presence of something that doesn't need to be held. Most men mistake attention for respect. Attention is easy to get respect is impossible to earn when you overextend. The return of respect means she senses that you've reclaimed your center. You're not orbiting her mood anymore. You're not bending your boundaries to keep peace. You're standing where you stand regardless of who stays or leaves. That's not defiance. That's self-respect. And self-respect has a gravity of its own. Epictetus said, "If you want to be respected by others, the great thing is to respect yourself." That respect isn't loud. It shows up in what you no longer tolerate, in what you no longer explain, in how you respond instead of react. When she feels that shift, curiosity ignites because the old version of you, predictable, emotionally available on demand, eager for reassurance, is gone. In its place is someone harder to read, not because he's hiding, but because he's no longer leaking his inner state. Curiosity also returns when your life becomes full again. Not full, not strategically busy, but internally rich. When your attention is no longer fixated on her perception, you become more present in everything else. That presence sharpens you. You speak with less urgency. You move with less hesitation. You're not trying to pull her back in, and that absence of pull creates tension. Not anxious tension, but magnetic tension. The kind that invites observation instead of resistance. Stoicism teaches detachment, but not indifference to growth. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." Emotional bravery means you're willing to let go of outcomes without hardening your heart. You don't cling and you don't close. You simply continue forward. That forward motion, unconcerned with being witnessed, signals strength. And strength is something people instinctively respect, even when they don't want to admit it. When her curiosity returns, you might notice subtle shifts in attention, timing, or tone. But the Stoic approach is not to analyze those shifts. It's to remain anchored regardless of them. Respect fades again the moment you start leaning into it. The moment you interpret curiosity as a green light to chase, explain, or reassert yourself emotionally, the balance collapses. Stoicism isn't about suppressing desire. It's about not letting desire dictate your behavior. Your role is not to respond to her renewed interest, but to continue embodying the version of yourself that made it possible. That means staying grounded in your values, staying disciplined with your attention, staying patient with uncertainty. Reminded himself daily, the tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say or think or do. That tranquility is not passive. It's active self-command. A powerful internal exercise is outcome neutrality. Each day, remind yourself, quietly, firmly, that your worth does not rise or fall based on anyone's interest. Say it until it feels boring. Another practice is response restraint. When an impulse arises to explain yourself, justify your choices, or seek clarity, pause, breathe. Ask yourself whether that action comes from strength or fear. Choose only what preserves your dignity. You can also train curiosity without chasing by deepening your own life inwardly. Focus your attention on mastery of your thoughts, your habits, your reactions. Stoicism is not about winning people back. It's about winning yourself back. And when you do that fully, respect doesn't need to be demanded. It returns on its own because it has nowhere else to go. If her respect and curiosity have returned, let that be confirmation of your internal shift, not a destination. Stay where you are. Keep your footing. Keep your standards intact. The most powerful move you can make is not to react at all, but to continue becoming someone who doesn't need to. Before you go, remember this Stoic truth. You don't need regret from the past to validate your worth in the present. If she regrets losing you, that realization didn't come from words, arguments, or explanations. It came from your absence, your growth, and your silence. You didn't chase. You didn't beg. You didn't collapse inward. You chose composure over chaos, strength over noise, self-respect over attachment. And that is why regret appears, not because you wanted it, but because you outgrew the version of yourself she once had access to. Whether she looks back with longing or not is no longer your concern. What matters is this: You now move forward as a man who understands his value without needing anyone else to confirm it. That's real power. That's stoic power. If this video resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. Where in your life can you practice more restraint, more self-control, more quiet confidence? And if you want to continue building that unshakable mindset, make sure you like the video, subscribe, and stay with this channel. Because the strongest men aren't the ones who are missed. They're the ones who are impossible to replace.